What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to a new video. Welcome to the oil pressure gauge review. This is gonna be interesting. It's gonna be in a couple of little parts, and I'm gonna try not to take up too much of your time. So, without keeping y'all in suspense too much longer, let's jump right into it. So where do I start? So let's start with the install. So the install was surprisingly not as hard as I thought it was going to be. I think the hardest part was trying to fish that wire and find it underneath the in the foot rail where the pedals are, coming from the firewall from the engine bay into the cabin. That was kind of a hard part because you got to get all that big bulky wire through all of that stuff, and you got to go through all the little padding and all that stuff that's on in between the firewall and the floor and the carpet and all of that. Other than that, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, but it was interesting, and I'm glad it worked out for me. How important is the oil pressure gauge to me, in my opinion? Well, for one thing, you get to monitor the motor. You get to see what your oil pressure is, so that's kind of like really how you can tell what you're doing, because the only other indication you have that you have a problem with your oil pressure is going to be that little light with the oil can on it. But the thing about that thing is, once you see it, it's already too late. It's done. So if you can start seeing anything going on with your motor as far as oil pressure is concerned and being able to protect your motor, having an oil pressure gauge is good for that in that regard. All right, y'all, so I got my trusty note cheat sheet here where I wrote down a few things as I was, driving the truck. So, well, basically, let me tell you about the situation I had with the truck. So with the truck, I was going, and that was my first time, really my first experience with having an oil pressure gauge inside of a vehicle that I can look at. And every time, when you start the car, at first startup is weird. It's a big difference between how that truck is and how this car is, because when you start the truck up, the oil pressure is right at around 36 to 38 psi. It's kind of crazy, right? But and then after I started driving for a little while, I got up to like 4 hours driving. It was still not quite warmed up all the way yet, but we got it up to 45 miles per hour, and the oil pressure gauge was sitting at around 40 psi. So after riding a little while long, I got on the freeway, got up to about like 65 miles per hour. Once I got to that 65 miles per hour, I was at around, the coolant temp was like 210, around that area. It was the coolant was warmed up pretty good, but not the oil. But I was seeing around 41, 42 psi. After warming up and cruising a little bit more, kind of set the cruise control at 65 and all of that, I started seeing 47 to 48 psi. So when I get to talking about what the Ghost does, you're gonna notice another crazy difference about it. Crazy differences about it, But at idle, after I was already warmed up, I was at a stoplight and all that, sitting at around like a little above 500 RPM, stuff like that. At a stoplight, I was seeing like 35 psi pressure. So after, being fully warmed up and me getting on it, like after I left the gas light, just hit the gas and just go while it was going up, I was seeing about 50 psi on the truck. So that was cool. But the instance that I want to tell you about that helped me notice how important an oil pressure gauge is that I was riding one day, and I'm always looking at it. I turned the truck on and noticed that the freaking oil pressure was sitting at 0, and I'm like, okay, we got a problem here. So it made me stop everything, look at all the stuff, make sure I had oil in the truck and all that, make sure it wasn't nothing like all the oil came out of the truck or some crazy stuff like that. But once I did that, it pretty much, I wasn't seeing any issues. The truck was fine, it was running fine. But it let me know that my oil pressure gauge was messed up, or I was having a problem with it. Without that oil pressure gauge, I would have never known and just been driving on the thing and not even knowing the oil pressure. So that kind of helped me a lot in finding that issue and troubleshooting that and be able to fix that so I can get back to seeing my normal operating pressures and stuff. So that's kind of what got me wanting having an oil pressure gauge. So the interesting numbers on the old Ghost here. So let's see now. So I guess y'all seen when we did the install, whenever I first started up the car, it was like showing just the 3 lines on there. And at first I thought it was a problem or something was wrong, but then after looking into it a little bit more, I noticed that the gauge only goes to 100 psi. So that tells you on first startup that the oil pressures are pretty high. So it's going up, it's past 100. So at that point, whenever the car starts to calm down a little bit, that's when you start seeing, that's when the 100 came on actually. That means we were right at 100 PSI. And then it was starting to go down from there. A little bit, so I got a bunch of numbers right here, man. So this is kind of crazy how this went. So at that point, usually, that's when I told y'all about, usually when I drive my car, when I'm about to go in the morning time, I start the engine up. I usually wait till I see the coolant temp get to about 130 degrees, 135 degrees, something like that. Once I see that, I go ahead and pull off, thinking that, you know, I'm good. So what I've noticed is that looking at the oil pressure in correlation to that coolant temp, my oil pressure was at around 70 to 71. So I was like, dang. And usually I'm on that first, when you look at the gauge, on that first orange line after the white line. So I figured, it's probably good enough for me to go, especially if I need to hurry up and get up out of there. So now I think it's best to wait till your coolant temp is around 142 degrees if you don't have, like I said, oil pressure gauge, because at that temperature, the car was at around 55 to 56 PSI as far as oil pressure, which is pretty much like a halfway point. So at that point, that don't mean you can just get on it and just get to driving crazy and stuff. You can't do that. So now, doing that, you can do some mild driving. So at around 1,500 to 2,000 RPMs, the coolant temp was at 163 degrees. And while it's at that rate, and I'm already driving at this point, but from 1,500 to 2,000 RPMs, I was seeing about 90 PSI. Now I'm seeing that 90 PSI because the oil is not completely up to temperature yet. It's getting warm, but it's not quite there yet. If I blipped it anything over 2,000, I would have hit like 100. I was hitting 100 PSI. So now saying that, I got up to like 2,500. The engine temps was at 171 degrees, but I was hitting 100 PSI and over. At that point, it was just like tapping out on the oil pressure gauge that I got, because like I said, it only goes to 100. So from there, I got to driving a little bit more. The temperature got up to 196 degrees, still at around 2,500. Now that's still 2,500 RPMs. It's 196 degree coolant temps. Now my oil pressures was around 87 to 89. So now you can tell we getting kind of warm now. Because now, you know, your oil pressure is it really tracks flow of oil through all of the vital components and stuff like that. So now, getting on it again, I had got the RPMs up to like 2,900, almost up to 3,000. At that point, I'm really starting the coolant temp is starting to balance out because I'm seeing like 194 degrees. And at that point, the oil pressure was at around 67 to 69 PSI. Now, this is after doing about 6 miles of driving from from a dead stop. From 6 miles later, 65 miles per hour. I'm hitting 2,900 RPMs, and that's what I was seeing. So now I got to a stoplight. At the stoplight, I was around 192 degrees on the coolant temp, idling, sitting at the red light, and that's when I knew the car was completely warmed up, because they say the safest when you warmed up pretty good, you should be seeing oil pressure between 15 to 20. So at that point, I saw 16 to 17 PSI. That means I'm completely warmed up. I'm good to go. From time to time, I do see 14 to 15. This is after driving for quite a while. So, and then regular driving, like the driving video we did a while back, driving, getting up to like 3,000 RPM, I was seeing 70 PSI, and I'm going, that's like 43 miles per hour. I'm just looking at my notes. That's why I keep looking down. But, and at that point, the pressures I was seeing was anywhere from 56 to 65, because it moves according to your RPM. So it keeps moving. But that's kind of my experience with it. I know I'm throwing a whole bunch of numbers and stuff at y'all, but what we're gonna do is we're gonna go take a ride. I'm gonna put y'all on the camera. We're gonna do a POV, and as we going, like, and I'm warming up the car and all of that stuff, and then what the temperatures I'm seeing, and then, you know, how they correlate, where you can kind of look at what I'm seeing whenever I'm driving. So we're gonna take a ride, look at that, get the car warmed up, and then show y'all what it does. I'm gonna try and do my All right, y'all, here we go. So we're gonna go ahead and start this thing up. So It does a cool little countdown. Then boom. So now we got our 3 dots. So we're gonna go through the warm-up process, and then I'll let y'all see what it looks like whenever I get to my coolant temp at 100, and it's 104 now. When I get to 130, then y'all will see what I mean as far as for what how the temperatures and oil pressure correlate to each other. Here we are, we at 133 degrees. Our temps is like 60, you know, it's in the 60s. And that's where our RPM is at. We're a little under 1,000, so like maybe like nine something. Now when we get to about 140, I say 150, that's when I'll let y'all see where the pressure is in correlation to that temperature, and why I feel like, you know, it's a little bit safer to drive. You see where the temp gauge is right here? It's right there, almost to the white line. Now the white line is where they say it's pretty safe to drive it at, but I'm gonna show you how that line, that pressure, and what the coolant temp is. So now we done hit 151 degrees. See, we are just past that second white line on the gauge for the coolant temp, and we sitting at around 45, 47 PSI. So now, I'm gonna go ahead. Here we go now. We at 160, 38 PSI. Let's get this thing moving. So the engine is kind of warm, but not really completely warm. Oh, don't scrape, don't scrape, don't scrape. Oh, still scraped. All right, here we go. All right, so here we go. Man, y'all see my RPMs. See where we at, like 90 PSI. We had like a little over 2,500, 174 degrees. So you would think, oh man, the coolant temps are pretty high. I should be good to go. No, you're not. Engine temps are not quite warm enough yet. Open up the sunroof, get a little air in here. See, I'm barely doing anything here. And that's what we looking like. See what I mean? 2,000 RPMs. See how your pressure's jumping around? And then that's our temp. We're 187 degrees right now as far as the coolant temp. Man, I'm hoping y'all can see this because it's kind of hard for me to tell because I'm trying to look at the road and that at the same time with a camera in my face. Hopefully this is better. But like there we are. We're like, the coolant temps is already all the way up to temp. You can see right here, I'm at 194 degrees. And this is what we're idling at right now. So we're getting pretty warm. We're almost to where we want to be at operating temperature wise. So we at 24, 23. But like I say, the true tell on it, when normally driving, you should be seeing anywhere from around 50 to 65 PSI when your oil is completely warm. Occasionally it'll hit 70, you know what I mean, depending on where you are in the RPMs. But other than that, I should be right on it right now. Should be close to being all the way warmed up. Like right now, like you see, I'm barely doing anything. I'm at 2,000 RPMs and I'm hitting like 60 PSI, a little above 60 PSI. And I'm at 192 degrees outside. But yeah, here we go. Now we 3,000 RPMs, third gear, doing 43. We at 70 PSI. So when you're driving, when you got your oil pressure gauge, what you're looking for is a significant drop in what you regularly see whenever you hit the gas at these levels. That's why I make mental notes of what the car should be at. You know what I mean? At what mileage per hour. God dog, dude, how long does it take, bruh? See now, we ain't even getting up to 100 because the car's pretty warmed up. I'm able to get on it pretty good and stay below 80 PSI. But looking at how the difference between being in the truck and being in the car, how exaggerated the pressures are in the car, man, it's like super high. Like for no reason. I mean, I ain't gonna say not for no reason, it's there for a reason. But like I said, it's a big difference between the two on where they're normally operating at pressure wise. But yeah, I kind of wanted y'all just to see that, you know what I mean? How, you know, though you want to be able to look at your coolant temps, be like, man, if the coolant is that temperature, the oil pressure's got to be I mean, the oil has to be warm enough to be riding in the car, and it's not really ever the case. So, god dog. So that it's really good to have an oil pressure gauge with you whenever you ride and do. So me get myself to this appointment, man, and then we'll talk a little bit more after this and wrap this thing up. I don't want this, trying not to get this video to be too long. I just don't want to miss out. One more thing real quick. I want to show you guys that if y'all can see it riding it around, you know, see it hit 14. So it's anywhere from, you know, about 15, 16, sometimes hit 17, but that's idling. Car's completely warmed up. See the gauge right there. We idling. I've been sitting here for a minute, but my coolant temperature's at 196 right now. All right, fam. So hopefully that information and that little clip of showing you what the oil pressure gauge does in correlation to the engine temps, and kind of how you can tell that, you know, you get to a certain temperature if your car's warm enough, you start romping on it or not. Or if, like, let's say you're late to work and you want to let your car warm up for a little bit, you know around what temperature it'll be better to leave at. Because like I said before, I thought 130 degrees coolant temp was warm enough for the car. Nah, it's not. So and you know, your normal operating pressure, just say whenever your temperature's all the way up like it's supposed to be, when you're idling anywhere, I think they say 15 to 20 is good to look at. Like even though eventually sometimes I've seen 14 psi, but that could possibly be your oil is getting kind of old. You know, who knows? I think I might do a video on, you know, going to a thicker oil, like maybe 5W40, because it's 5W30 in the Ghost right now. So I might try to 5W40 and see if that affects the oil pressure any. So, you know, stay tuned for that video when it comes out, just to see how it changes how the engine functions, or basically you know, as far as for pressures wise, how it affects the motor by using the thicker oil in the car. Also, and like I said, a normal cruising PSI. I'm looking at my cheat sheet, y'all. It's good to see anywhere from 55 to like 70 PSI. I mean, that depends on how you're getting on it. That's a broad range, but you're pretty good in that range. You know, so if you see anything weird like too high pressure or too low pressure, you know you need to shut your motor down and see what's going on, the way you can save it. So like I said, the install wasn't that bad. Wasn't as bad as I thought it was gonna be, but it wound up going pretty good. And I walked out of the situation like, man, I can install gauge. And I thought that was something I would always send for somebody else to do, because I was like, I don't want to mess with it. I might wire something into the wrong thing, hit the windshield wipers, and the horn started honking or something. But that wasn't the case. It was easy. That one, it didn't even need anything but a couple of wires. You got some gauges out there that it illuminates, so that requires you to use that many more wires to get it hooked up, but it shouldn't be that bad. So, man, I appreciate y'all checking me out on this video, man, taking the time out to watch it, man. I'm trying not to make this thing too long, but thank y'all, man. And until that next video, your boy will see you. Make sure that you like, subscribe, and hit that bell notification so you get notified whenever I put out a new video. Till then, peace.